So welcome everyone. I'm Judy Black, president of the RASC Halifax Center. And just a reminder that we are recording this so that even if you have to pop out for a few minutes, you can certainly review this at any point in time afterwards. Also, if you have any questions during any of the presentations, put them into the chat and we will ask them at the end of each presentation. And please mute your microphone if you haven't already done so, unless you are about to speak. And certainly the speakers, you can unmute yourselves before you present. For those of you, and I don't think anyone here has not attended a meeting or is not a member, but I will go through this anyway for those that review this video in the future and aren't members. There are several reasons as to why you should become one. There are several perks. One is the Observer's Handbook, which every member gets on an annual basis as they, at about this time of year, September, October. Also access to, actually, you're sent a copy of Explore the Universe guide, which is a copy of the observing program. There's also a workbook to go with this that you can order online. You also get an annual subscription to the RASC magazine, Sky News. This is the latest edition, and there are a few things that I'll highlight later in a presentation, and as well as an annual subscription to the journal. Now, I have the paper copy, but certainly you can subscribe only to the electronic copy at your choice as to how you do this. Now, that's the national, but certainly locally, you get access to our meeting notices and our whatnot. You also get access to this fabulous newsletter that is produced 5 times a year by Lisa Ann Fanning and John McPhee. And this is the latest edition. And there's this phenomenal photograph of by Jason Dane on the front cover. Just wait till you see it. There are lots of articles in there from members, from Lisa, Dave Hoskin, and Dave Chapman as well. You also get access to several national productions. And more currently, and you'll hear more about how to get it, but your own copy of the RASC 2022 calendar, and our own Paul Gray is the editor of this edition, and I believe this is the last year that he is so. So there are several reasons why you should be joining RASC. I'll tell you how near the end of the news from the board. Happy birthday to everyone who was celebrated over the past month and in the upcoming month until we meet again. Congratulations on another circumnavigation of the sun, and may there be many more. So now I'm going to share my screen. And again, I will welcome you to our members meeting for November 6th, 2021. You can access our center through various means, one being our website, which is halifax.rasc.ca. You can contact us on the YouTube channel, which just search for RASC Halifax. And certainly if you have any questions or suggestions that you have, you can email me at president@halifax.rasc.ca. I would like to make acknowledgement of the Indigenous lands that we currently sit on. At this time, Halifax Center would like to begin by acknowledging that we are Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq and Maliseet peoples first signed with the British Crown back in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. I'd also like to welcome our members from near and far who are in attendance, and also want you to know that RASC, as well as RASC Halifax Center, believes in and practices inclusivity and diversity. All are welcome, regardless of age, disability, gender, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, ethnic origin, color, nationality, national origin, religion or belief, or sex and sexual orientation. We are opposed to all forms of unlawful and unfair discrimination. In all our members' meetings, we hope we are providing interesting topics for a wide variety of viewers. And just a reminder again that this session is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So our agenda for today is really quite simple. After this welcome, we'll be welcoming our 3 guest speakers, Dave Lane, who will be addressing the Mini Robotic Observatory, Lisa Ann Fanning about the link between animal behavior and astronomical events, and Chris, whoops, forgot the S, sorry, Chris, astronomy lore, talking about the Daughters of Nash and a little desert, whoop, go back again. Anyways, there's the topics there. Food for the Soul by Paul Heath will follow that, followed by What's Up in the November Skies by Dave Chapman, and then News from the Board, last but not least. Once that is completed, we will stop the recording, and the members can, and non-members alike, can join us during our Astro chat, and that is informal and not recorded. So at the end of our News from the Board, we will stop recording, and everything after that is only through memory, not through recording. So with that in mind, I'm going to stop share and welcome our first presenter, Dave Lane. Now, Dave Lane has many roles within our center. He has served on our board. He served on the national one too, for that matter, and on several committees. But he is also, more importantly, the owner and operator of something called the Mini Robotic Observatory. And it's really quite cool. And I know some members have requested that Dave redo this presentation because newer members would like to hear more about it. So Dave, I'll leave it to you to take it away.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, first of all, the ownership is somewhat in dispute. As the telescope is mine, most of the parts belong to St. Mary's University. The wood was made of junk that was in my house that I had access to during COVID. So it's hard to say who actually owns this telescope. But anyway, this is the fourth time I've given this presentation. I haven't given it to the club before. I think, Judy, you probably were at maybe the Kingston Center meeting when it was given there, because I've given it in Toronto, or virtually, I should say, in Toronto, Kingston, and the Winnipeg centers. Yeah, as I'm a fan of Stuart McLean, the late Stuart McLean of the Vinyl Cafe. So our logo is, "We may not be big, but we're small," which was a phrase that he used to describe the Dave's bookstore, which was part of the stories in the Vinyl Cafe. Let's see if I can make this go forward here. Yeah, okay, all right. So the motivation here was, why did I do this? I've got enough telescopes to look after. I don't really have a good reason. I have, I guess you always need 3 sizes, small, medium, and large. I already had the other 2 sizes, medium and large. Medium is the observatory that has been around for quite a while in my backyard, the Abbey Ridge Observatory, which is Celestron 14 at the present time. And on the right is the St. Mary's University's Burke Gaffney Observatory, which is a Planewave 24-inch. Both of those are automated using the exact same software. And I wanted to come up with, I always had this on my list of things to do, was to come up with a robotic observatory that could be relatively simple and inexpensive to reproduce. And my hope is, whether I ever get to this is question, I'd like to see a few of these on places like school roofs, because they are cheap enough and small enough that they could easily be reproduced and appear in the education sector. So that was my original motivation. What caused me to do this last year was largely COVID. Mid-March 2020, we were home from the university, and there was some question about what we would do without access to our usual sort of tools and toys. So I took this on as a spring COVID project, largely because I had a lot of the materials or could order them online. Truth be told, I have been gathering parts for about 2 years, unbeknownst to what my boss might have been told. So I gathered the mount, I gathered the camera and a few other things with this goal in the future. And now I had the time to do it, so off I went. I also had some leftover building materials in the basement that I could use to build the enclosure. So it's mostly built with just stuff that I already had or scrap around the house. And again, I wanted to make a robotic telescope from inexpensive parts. So inexpensive cameras, inexpensive telescope mount, trying to keep the whole thing under $10,000, hopefully as inexpensive as maybe $7,000, something like that in Canadian dollars, to make it affordable to build by a school or some sort of modest fundraising campaign. And I wanted to have a development environment for software, so I could use this telescope as a test bed for changes to the other two telescopes, because the other two telescopes have active users, students and people using them around the world. The last thing you want to do is have me go in and change the programming, from day to day to day and potentially break things. And I certainly have done that in the past as part of the development of the BGO in particular. So this would give me a sort of a place to play with new software and make sure it works fine before it's rolled out to the other two observatories. The other motivation was, the world is changing with respect to cameras and imaging. Even watching the astrophotographers in our own center over the last, 5 years or so. Most astrophotographers about 5 years ago were using digital SLR cameras almost exclusively, and a few people were using CCDs, but it's almost completely tipped on its side now, and most of the serious astrophotographers have now switched to a dedicated astro camera with a CMOS sensor, and that's largely due to cost. CMOS cameras are simply way less expensive than CCD cameras, and their quality of the imaging is better than a DSLR camera. So it's kind of reaches the sweet spot where you can spend $1,500 and get a pretty nice camera, and have it dedicated to astronomy and have it cooled and have all the things that you might have previously wished you had in a CCD camera that you couldn't afford. So so I wanted to gain experience with using a CMOS camera, because they are different beasts. They calibrate differently. They're just different enough that I needed to do experiments. So I bought one of those cameras and used it in this project. So a bit of a timeline. I'm not going to go through all these, but as most of you know, I've been working on robotic telescopes for a long time. In fact, even before this, the beginning of this list here in 2013, when we replaced the telescope at the Burke-Gaffney Observatory. Before that, I had automated my own backyard observatory, but not in a sophisticated way, mainly in a way to observe galaxies for the purposes of supernova searching. Back in about 2004, Paul Gray and I started searching for supernovas in the backyard here, and that got the initial automation going, so they could observe hundreds of galaxies on a given night, and that led to, I think, initially 2 supernova discoveries in 2005, and then some later on with Catherine, Paul's daughter, and also his son Nathan later on. Automation in observatory is nothing new to me, but what was new was we launched this social media interface, the Twitter interface, in 2015, and that was largely done because it was a promise to the donor who gave us the money for the telescope. We said, hey, we're gonna do something different. We're gonna make this telescopes available to the world on social media. So I had to figure out how to make that happen. So that took about 1.5 years before the first version of that came out, and then over the past 5 or 6 years, it's simply been getting more capable, more interfaces. There's now an app you can use on your Mac, Windows, or Android phone. You can talk to it even with text messaging on your cell phone. And more recently, because of COVID, I added the capability of live observing. So you could, I'll talk about that later. I've got an example. I'll just mention that now. And then coming soon, next month, there'll be a new mount installed at the Burke Gaffney to replace the 50-year-old Ealing mount that's been there for 50 years. Time to replace it. So we managed to find the funding to get that replaced. So that'll really improve the throughput and the accuracy of the images that come out of that telescope. I really look forward to seeing how much more productive it is with a mount that can slew at 20 degrees per second versus a half a degree per second with the current mount. And the result of that at BGO is we've had about 30,000 observations by over 600 separate observers over the last 6 years from around the world. And of course, many of our users are the people in this room, virtual room, our own Halifax Center members. So again, the design goals to develop an inexpensive observatory, hopefully between, I have actually done that between 7 and 10. Largely depends on what camera you choose and what telescope you choose, because you can easily spend 7,000 on those two items alone. But if you're careful in what you choose and are modest in your outcomes, you can certainly reach the 7,000 to 8,000 range in Canadian dollars. I wanted to be self-contained, so this thing had to be, a scope in the box. So inside the enclosure is the telescope, the mount, the camera, the computer. Basically, only thing going in is AC power. It has a wireless connection to the internet, and that's it. Everything else is in the box, and it must fit through a 32-inch door. And I chose that because I wanted, again, it to be possible for you to take this thing and carry it up a flight of stairs and put it on the roof of the building without a crane. So, and that was realized as well. And I wanted to run exactly the same programming that runs on the other two observatories, which I call that software mission control. And the advantage of having the exact same programming running on the exact same on 3 different observatories is, you make a change to one, you can roll it out to the others without having to maintain separate software for different telescopes. And the last bit is something that was driven by COVID, and that was the ability to have a live mode where you can log in remote on a web browser and control the observatory live and take images as you choose at the moment. And that was done because we wanted to provide an interactive capability for our students at SMU, so they would have, during COVID, they couldn't go to the telescope and use it in person. So this was sort of the next best thing we'd come up with, is the ability for them to access and use the observatory through a web browser and use it live rather than through observations that are queued the way that most observations are done. So that was rolled out first on the mini robotic observatory, and after it worked there, it was just added to the Burke Gaffney. So this mission control software, what does it do? I'm sure many of you have already know about this because you've used it, but you basically choose a way to communicate with it. The options are Facebook Messenger, text message from a cell phone, email, or Twitter direct message, and or a dedicated app, as I talked about earlier. And you basically have a conversation with the telescope. You send it commands, you type commands, and it replies either instantly or within a minute or two, depending on the medium you're using to communicate. And when you request an observation, you request it in a certain format, and then it validates to make sure that it's a reasonable request. Obviously won't, if you ask it to observe something like the Tarantula Nebula, it's going to come back and say, sorry, that object is too far south to be observed from Halifax. Or if you ask it to observe the sun, you'll get a snarky response. It validates it, and then it queues it, and then the next time when the sky is clear, the observation will get done, and the result will get sent to you. And while this is all happening, there are lots of commands for communicating and querying the database and editing your observations, or deleting them, or finding out what's going on with the observatory, checking the weather, that sort of thing. While it's actually operating, it's tweeting out its status. So it's telling you what it's doing. It's telling you not only your observations as they're taking place, but the other people that are using it, because it's multi-user observatory. There may be 10 or 15 people using it on a given night. So you see all those messages on the Twitter feed of the observatory. It also sends a live image. So when an image is taken, it does its best to create a pretty good representation of the image as a JPEG and sends that out to the Twitter feed or back directly to you in whatever medium you're using to communicate with the observatory. In the morning, it does a better job at the processing and notifies the observers to where they can find their data and archives the images in an online repository. So that all happens shortly after sunrise or around the time the sun is coming up. So how do you talk to it? Well, you basically send hashtag commands. So a word prefixed by the number sign is called a hashtag. So the most common one that people use is request. So you might say something like request object equals M42 or request object equals moon or something like that. If you want to be specific, well, by the way, it will guess suitable exposures based on the type of object it is. So it'll look up an object and say, oh, that's a galaxy. Okay, we want to have a longer exposure for that one versus a star cluster. It makes special cases for the planets and the moon. But if you don't want it to use what it comes up with, you can specify the exposure time, you can specify filters, and a whole bunch of other parameters to make the exposure a very custom exposure, much like you were doing your own astrophotography manually. And everything's on the website, and we've had, as I say, 600 users, and I bet you I haven't had more than 100 questions over 5 years from people. They figure it out. It's not difficult. There are lots of examples. Students and kids, high school kids, old folks like us, they figure it out. It's really it surprised me quite a bit. I thought I would have to spend a lot of time helping people, but just doesn't seem to be necessary. And then the communicator app even allows you to give it some English commands, like take a picture or what's your status, that sort of thing. And that on the Android app, you can actually speak those commands to your phone, and it will talk back what the answer. So here's an example of a conversation this is from the Burke-Gaffney Observatory some years ago. So ask for the weather, very cloudy, not surprising. You can look up an object ahead of time to see if it understands the name of the object that you're about to observe, and it will determine whether it can be requested now, because it only will allow you to observe an object that is visible from Halifax above the horizon of the observatory within the next month. So you can't request an object that's not visible for some time in the future. One of the things that people don't realize is that, or don't think about, I don't think, is that the observatory observes all night. So you're not constrained by the objects that happen to be visible in the evening. So what we would consider, an evening object in spring, might be perfectly fine in the fall, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So you've got a wide range of the year available at any time, because the telescope does not sleep. Well, it sleeps during the day, which is good. Here's a complicated example. I think you can see my cursor here. So request object equals, that's a galaxy that has lots of supernovae in it usually. Filter equals V, exposure 300 seconds, minimum altitude 40, so you can specify how low or high an observation is. You can even say how much of the moon can be illuminated. So if you want a dark sky, you might say maximum moon equals 0, and then it won't try to observe unless the moon is not up. And then you can give it a name, comment equals, or your own human content. That would go back into the queue, and then the next clear night that would get observed. Again, these commands are all the same, whether you're talking to the ARO, the BGO, or the mini MRO, the mini robotic observatory. So getting on to the MRO specifics, this is what it looked like before it became an observatory. So this is just sitting out on my deck out in the backyard. So an advanced Celestron Advanced Astromaster 4-inch refractor. You can see the camera and the focuser, and there's a computer hanging here, and the cloud sensor here on the right. And that's how I initially started. So I would drag this thing out to the backyard when there was going to be a clear night and no expectation of rain, and let it run overnight. Eventually, in the right here, I built a base. I got rid of the tripod. This base would eventually become the bottom of the observatory, and I would roll it back and forth between the basement and the deck with Michelle's garden cart. But unfortunately, sometimes things don't go according to plan. So I had an accident, and by some luck, the telescope did not break. In fact, this wooden thing that held the base together actually was the sacrificial part of the collision, and luckily that was all that broke. So I was able to get it back together, and after that I stopped moving it out to the backyard. I ended up just covering it with tarps just to avoid the collision. I'm in a rural area. I wasn't too worried about someone stealing the telescope, because everyone was, of course, was staying home then, right? So even the thieves, we hope. So that's sort of the next stage. Then once I got it to the point where, hey, this is really going to work. This inexpensive mount can take good images, and this telescope is matched well with this camera, and so on. I took the next step and started to design and build an enclosure. Again, the plan was, or the desire was to have this thing compact, fit through a 32-inch door, be readily constructible by the scrap plywood I happen to have in the basement. And this is what I came up with. I snuck out a few times to Home Depot to get hardware and nails and hinges and stuff like that, but largely it was just junk that I had in the basement already. So it's a clamshell design. The sides fold open, fold close on hinges, and that's the close. On the right is the closed configuration. This is what the finished unit looks like. Enclosed, and also I added some rubber flaps just to keep. I found without those I needed to occasionally dust the snow out of the interior, so that was definitely needed. That's the cloud sensor, but I'm not going to say anything more because I've got a little video here for you in a second here. That's the open configuration. I've got a video. Let me just find the video here. And hopefully you'll be able to hear the sound for this video. Okay, let's start by opening the roof. We'll use the Android app for that. Open Sesame. Takes a few seconds for it to check a few things before it starts to open. This video was taken, I think it was last fall, about a year ago. Okay, while it's opening, I'll just mention a few things. It sits on any flat surface. You just shim it to get it level. On the side, on the east side, there's an access panel that allows you to get inside in the event that the computer won't open the roof for you when you request it. There's a cloud sensor, which is separate. And it's oriented with the long direction in the north-south, and the shorter is east-west. So on my right here is the western direction, east is this way. The opening and closing is done by 4 linear actuators. And these have auto stops in them, so they run as far as they can and then they stop. And when closing, there's magnetic switches here that are used to detect that the roof is in the closed position. Let's move the telescope. Go to Ring Nebula now.
azimuth 95 degrees and altitude 56 degrees.
Okay, inside we'll find the telescope is a 4-inch Genesis refractor. I've had that telescope for nearly 30 years, and it's a great little telescope. On the back end, there's a CMOS camera from ZWO and an 8-position filter wheel that includes the regular red, green, blue luminance and the 3 narrowband filters. The mount is a Celestron Advanced BX, which is a pretty good mount at a really good price. So it fit well with this project. Other features you will find in here, let's move around the other side. There is electric focus, Pegasus Astro focus cube. And over on this side is a relay controller used for turning things off and on, running the dew heater, and a USB hub, which can be controlled so that you can individually turn on and off USB devices, which is an excellent feature when you're running remote and you need to reset something without rebooting the software. Under here is the computer. It's sort of a brick style computer, self-contained, includes everything that the observatory needs: a website, database, data storage, image processing, and a power supply here on the right, which essentially is just 12 volts. So this system could be run on 12 volts or 110 as I have it presently configured. And last but not least, this little device here is a ultrasonic sensor which detects the presence of the telescope above it. And that's just a safety feature to make sure the telescope is in its parked position before it tries to close the roof. Otherwise, the scope would not fit, and that would not be good. So we'll just end this brief video and we'll close the roof.
I'm just going to stop that there. Okay, get back in the presentation again. There we go. Yeah, so I'm not going to go through this, but these are some of the tech specs of what I talked about: the camera and the filters that it has, all the various devices. This is all on the observatory's website. What I will mention is the field of view is actually pretty awesome. That Genesis telescope has with photographic film has a 4-degree field of view. So with the slightly smaller CCD or CMOS sensor, it's still pretty big, 2 by 1.5 degrees, which fits many objects, including, as you'll see in a few minutes, the Andromeda Galaxy pretty much all fits. But it's a sharp enough resolution, 3 arc seconds, to be able to resolve some pretty small features as well. So it's a great compromise between field of view and high resolution in a small telescope. So the communicator app, I'll just show you briefly how that works. Again, you can communicate with the telescope by using social media, sending a tweet, sending it Facebook messages or emails or whatever. But it's actually more convenient if you have access to a computer or an Android phone to simply use the app, because it's just a much quicker experience. So I could type, for example, a command, who am I? And it will just tell me who I am, make sure I'm authenticated. So it tells me who I am, and I can click up a web browser, pops up, and it tells me who I am. I'm the manager. I could say, what's your status? That asks the telescope what its current status is. I'm talking to the ARO right now because I should have mentioned earlier, the mini Robotic Observatory is actually out of service at the moment. It had a bit of a water ingress problem earlier this year, and I haven't fixed the things that got broken yet. So that's something I need to get to shortly. So I'm actually talking to the other one in the backyard. So it's waiting for it to get dark. It observed last night. So now it's just sitting during the daytime sleeping, waiting for it to get dark. I might say something like request object equals M57. And so it'll, oh, I typed request wrong. And it validates, and now that's in the queue. And now I might want to say, show me my requests. Whoops. And again, it will bring up a web browser so I can see all my requests and M57. So it chose 600 seconds in this case, 10 minutes through a clear filter. Because I use this app and the observers use this app as a complete interface to the observatory, you can also get things like, what's the weather like at the observatory? So that will query the weather sensors and tell you what's going on there right now. So sky is clear, sky temperature -23. That just tells us that's related to whether the clear clouds, air temperature +9, and I can even bring up a graph showing, wow, we've had some clear weather over the last 24 hours. And I can also ask Environment Canada for a forecast, and we'll query Environment Canada and give you back the observatory's forecast for the next day. So that's basically how it works. If you go to the actual website, if I go back to messages and get the message that it sent me, I can see what happened last night. Waiting for it to get dark. Those are the private messages to me. If I saw what it said publicly, these are the messages that would have been sent out by Twitter last night as it was observing for the folks that are using the telescope, which at the moment are mostly not me. They're mostly amateur astronomers in Italy, Russia, and Sweden are using the observatory for science, amateur science projects, which is pretty cool. Because they're keeping the observatory busier and more productive than I would ever have time to do so. Okay, so let's just finish up here. Yeah, scheduled live observing was the feature that I mentioned earlier that I wanted to include as part of this. So what we're seeing here is a Zoom screen capture from a session led by Tiffany Fields, who was our telescope assistant last year, with her web browser showing sort of live usage of her taking images with 3 students that were in a second year class last fall. So that's what they see. So they can take images, see them live, and then again in the morning they can go and download the raw data to do whatever processing they wish to do with the images. So that feature ended up being a success and was used last year during COVID. How does it all work? Well, it's a bit complicated, not surprisingly. There are a lot of boxes, or either physical boxes or different parts of the software that make it all work. Here's just an example of what the mini robotic observatory looks like. So you've got, obviously you've got the telescope, the camera, as I mentioned earlier, the ability to focus. You've got the mount itself, some way to communicate to move it around the sky. You've got a roof controller that has the electronics and ability to open and close the roof and detect that it's open or closed, and whatnot. There's a database which stores all the observations and the data associated with running the observatory. There's a website that people can connect to download their data. There's a gateway to connect to social media. So it's another piece of software that runs. There's also the Windows, Mac, Android app that the observers use. And there's separate programs running that manage the communication between the users and the observatory. That's this box here. And there's another box running the same technology that's running the actual observatory. And these are largely just a bunch of scripts, so English-like programming that just deals with all the what ifs that happen when you have to go do observing. You know, is the sky clear? Is the telescope pointed properly? Taking pictures, downloading, all the things that have to happen. It's a lot of programming, but it's not as complicated as you might think when you actually look at it. You think that this would be really, really complicated. It's not as complicated as I thought it was originally going to be when I started at this 5 or 6 years ago. Some examples of what has come out of this telescope. Some of these most of these are not taken by me. This is an example, Simone Balzoni from near Milan, Italy. He's a regular observer both at all 3 observatories. He's an amateur astronomer there and is doing pretty picture imaging, but also now starting to get into variable star observing. So this, of course, is M45 taken in color through the 4 filters, about 40 minutes exposure, something like that. This is an image I took just for fun of the Coma Galaxy cluster. So this is a fairly wide field of view, as I mentioned earlier, about 2 by 1.5 degrees, about 1.3 hours of exposure, black and white. Almost every speck you see here is a galaxy. And I plotted all the galaxies from my planetarium software, and there are about 520 galaxies on that frame. So pretty awesome for a 4-inch telescope to pick up 500 galaxies in one image. I thought that was pretty awesome. Here's a zoom in of the center part of it. And almost every one of these fuzzy things here is not a fuzzy star, it's an actual galaxy. Again, Simone took an image in color of Markarian's chain in the center of the Virgo galaxy cluster. So that's pretty cool. That was about almost 2 hours, I guess, 5,340 seconds. It seems like an odd number of seconds, and that's because the software, as it does its processing, it's taking 1-minute exposures and it analyzes each individual frame, and the ones that are deemed to be not great frames, it drops them. So if it finds stars are a bit trailed compared to their the other frames, it will drop them from the final image. So you'll end up getting your, say, 10-minute exposure might actually turn into a, you know, an 8-minute exposure, and so on. Here's another one, color of M67. It's kind of cool. This is an old star cluster, old open cluster, so it will presumably have more reddish and orangey stars in it than a typical younger open star cluster. Seems like Simone has got a lot of images here. That's because he was one of the early adopters of the observatory. So this is what is that? Oh, Nova Cass. Somewhere in there is Nova Cass, and I'm not sure which star it is. There was a nova last year near the Bubble Nebula, so you can see the bubble right there. And somewhere in there is Nova Cass, and he oh, there it is. Yeah, oh sorry, it's right here. Yeah, around the left-hand side. I should have realized that he created a labeled image. So that star just appeared out of nowhere, and over time actually got brighter. So not only did he take a color image of it, he also observed it through the photometric filters that scientists use, B, V, R, and I. So that's B is blue, V is green, R is red, and I is near infrared. So his observations are the ones marked with the crosses, and the other observations are other observers around the world. So this is time on the x-axis. So the object was actually getting brighter as this happened. I think when I grabbed this last May, earlier this year, I should say, I believe he kept observing it because, so I didn't go and grab this image again after the fact, but it is kind of cool the way that a little telescope like that can Actually, little telescopes are great for bright objects. You can see this is only a magnitude of about 6.5 in infrared and 8.5 in blue. So this would be difficult to observe with a big telescope because it would just be too bright to make accurate measurements of. So this is a perfect use for a small telescope like the MRO. Here's another image I took of M31 in color as well, and I can't tell you how long exposure that was. It wasn't long, maybe half an hour. And within that galaxy, actually, I was taking these images just for fun, and one of my other observers, Philip Romanov from Russia, and the far eastern end of Russia, like so far east, it looks out on Japan, the Sea of Japan. He's a keen amateur astronomer that's doing an incredible job with a variety of different fields using remote telescopes, including all three of ours here. He happened to notice that an image I took just for fun had you can see a before, nothing here, and an after fuzzied thing. This is about 23 hours later. I think that's right. So the next night, and that's a nova that appeared in M31 back in March, I guess it was. Yeah, and he submitted this off to the IAU, and then it eventually ended up in a national telegram. So we sort of set an early time of when the nova actually happened. So we could say it wasn't there to this brightness at that time. And then again, was just done with a tiny little 4-inch telescope. Pretty cool. So what's next? Well, I got to get the MRO back in operation before winter. I've got a bit of machining to do to fix part of the mount that broke. Essentially what happened was one time the roof didn't close all the way because the telescope did not get in its parked location for whatever reason. And although when I look out my window here, you can see, hope you can see this. Uh-oh. Am I gone? No. Yeah, if you look out the window there, you can see the MRO out there. I never went out to actually look. That's that little tiny there. It looked like it was closed, but it wasn't. So when I actually got close to it, I said, holy cow, it's been sitting there for a month with rain getting inside. So there were some issues inside that have to be fixed in addition to a partially broken mount. So hopefully I'll get that back in operation in the next few weeks. The second thing I want to do is support one-shot colors. So that means the ability to take images with a camera like this one that I just bought. Well, actually, St. Mary's bought it, but that is has the filters built in. So I want to be able to support one-shot colors. So I'm going to work on the software for that. And who knows, someday maybe I may even bring it to Nova East. Wouldn't that be cool? Bring it stick it in the back of the car and drag it up to Nova East and set it up there in the field. That's something that I'd like to do just to sort of prove its ability to be portable. And what's after that, I have no idea. I think I'm at about the end. Happy to answer any questions you have. And if you're curious about the observatory, you can visit its website, observatory.ca/MRO, and some of the technical details are there. Plus, all of the images that it's ever taken are there as well. So I will stop talking.
Dave, what's next with bringing the small scope design to the public schools or to schools?
Yeah, I think what has to be done is documentation. So I have to actually create drawings for the enclosure. So because my thought was that in the case of a high school, there's no reason why that enclosure couldn't be built by the industrial arts class, the carpentry class. But they need to actually have, a drawing and a parts list with which to work from. So I think realistically, in order for it to be usable, I need to do up drawings of that enclosure and parts lists of all the parts. so that it can be reproduced. That's the biggest thing. I'm hoping to find an astronomy club that will take it on initially as a project. One of some center across the country. There has been some interest in Winnipeg because they are looking at doing something at their observatory. So that might happen in the next year. I don't know. But documentation is the main thing, because I can't create something that's going to create a lot more work for me on an ongoing basis. It really needs to be maybe productized a little bit more than a prototype as it is now.
It's a great project. Good luck.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Would it fit through the roof hatch of a bus?
Gee, the roof hatch, probably not. The back door, maybe.
No, I mean mounted on the roof hatch so I could
Oh.
drive and look through it at the same time.
Yeah, I think we need some anti-vibration pads for that one.
Dave, have you considered treating the wood so that it's weatherproof?
Yeah, actually, what I will probably do, probably won't happen before winter this year, but the roof is actually flashed with, flashing you'd use for eaves troughs and looking out my window here, fascia boards and stuff for a house. So I think I'm going to cover the entire observatory with flashing, and because it is deteriorating just from being in the weather. And while I painted it once, I suspect I'd have to keep painting it over and over again. The roof, however, the roof itself is flashed, or all flashing, aluminum flashing.
Dave, have you thought about adding any other instrumentation? Like you could put a small radio telescope antenna in there.
Never thought of that. I think radio is, well, first of all, the radio antenna wouldn't need to be the kind of antenna that would even need to be in an enclosure.
Right.
And there's really not a lot of image sources that are bright enough for any sort of reasonable sized radio setup. I suspect if I did anything, it would be spectroscopy. Because I could replace one of the filters with one of these star analyzer filters that breaks the light into component colors. So you could do very basic spectroscopy on bright stars. In fact, I didn't mention this, but the BGO, as part of the live observing now, we have a spectrograph on the Burke-Gaffney Observatory, and that can now be operated live through the web browser interface. So students can do spectra of stars or nebulae or whatever through that interface. So that would be the balance is I'm trying to keep the cost down. So when you start adding complexity like multiple cameras or multiple instruments or multiple telescopes, it just becomes too expensive, I guess.
Can you do look for planetary transits, exoplanet transits with the?
Yeah, yes. I did actually try to observe an existing exoplanet and was able to barely detect it. When you start, aperture is your friend in that case. The larger the aperture, the simply more easier it is to detect sort of the 1% level you need to be able to detect. So I did try it, and I think the result was inconclusive, but I could go back to it. 4 inches is a bit small for being able to detect sort of a 1% change in a magnitude 10th object. But you could certainly do surveys with a field of view of 2 by 1.5 degrees. That is, looking through the Milky Way, that's a lot of stars. So that could be a project that you could do for sure. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Dave. I'm sure that if anyone has questions, they can certainly contact you.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, many of you, as you know, have been using the Burke-Gaffney for doing imaging. I think probably our most regular observer from the RASC is probably probably Dave Chapman. And you see his images being posted quite a bit. That offer is open to anyone in the world. So if you're interested in imaging or just want to give it a try, feel free to go ahead. As I mentioned, the MRO is down at the moment, but once it gets back up again, you're more than welcome to use it as well. I find that it's a fun telescope to observe because the field of view is so rich, so wide that you can observe a lot of the big things that bigger telescopes aren't well suited for. But anyway, I'll end there.
Thank you.
I guess I got to stop my share here. There we go.
Okay. Well, again, thanks so much. And again, members and anyone watching this in the future can certainly contact Dave, and he has provided the means by which to do so in his presentation. So thanks again. Excuse me. Second on our list of presenters today is Lisa Ann Fanning. Lisa is a newbie, relatively speaking, to some of our members here. She's been a member for about 2 years now, Lisa, I believe. Has a background in birding, but a lot of her observing skills with birding have easily transferred over into observing the night skies. And she's an avid observer. You also know her because she's one of the co-editors of our newsletter, Nova Notes. And Lisa has because of her animal behavior observing that she's been doing, along with her above the atmosphere observing that she's been doing, has an interest in how they relate to each other. And she offered to give us a presentation on how they do. So Lisa, welcome and take it away. And you're muted, my dear. Still muted.
And I do that about 20 times a day at work too. So at least I'm consistent. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thanks. So thanks so much for that introduction, Judy. You pretty much summed it up. I did want to include an Indigenous land acknowledgement here for the area that I live in, and I wanted to acknowledge the Native peoples whose ancestral homelands we gather. Here in central New Jersey, it is the Lenni Lenape tribe or the Lenape tribe or the Delaware peoples. So I did want to make mention and honor them and the caretakers of these lands and waters and the elders who lived here before the indigenous today and generations to come. So a little bit about me. I've been interested in conservation since I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. My spark was the New York Aquarium, actually. I have a fascination with marine biology. I've always been very interested in the moon. I'll talk a little bit about what started that in a sec. I've loved science and math from early on, but I took another path to Wall Street. I didn't study science and math formally. I did live in Boston for 4 years, and I did humpback whale surveys for the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary, which is the civilian arm of the Coast Guard. I moved to New Jersey in 2005, met my husband Rob in 2010 while we were both chasing a rare sparrow in Cape May, New Jersey. So that started my birding career, if you will. And as far as some of the conservation work that I've done, I've volunteer monitor for beach nesting birds. So those are piping plovers, least terns, other species of terns as well for 11 plus years. I am an associate naturalist for New Jersey Audubon, as well as the field trip coordinator for Monmouth County Audubon. So you can see I'm very heavily bird focused. I've written about conservation, birds and insects for various publications and organizations. And I am currently the compiler for the Ramsey, New Jersey Christmas bird count, which is sponsored by National Audubon Society. How I came to RASC, I was sparked by astronomy in 2019, started looking at the moon through my birding scope and decided to buy 50 Things to See on the Moon. I reached out to John Reed during the pandemic because I wanted something a little more, and NEOWISE kind of sparked my interest. He led me to explore the universe. And then Dave Chapman just sweetened the pot by telling me that I needed to join the Halifax Center, and I'm glad that I did. So thank you. So this was the statement that got me started. Don't go fishing on a full or new moon. I mentioned I've always been moon aware. My father was a fisherman and used to take me on the party boats and out of Brooklyn, New York. And so he used to say, don't go fishing 2 days before, 2 days after. So a lot of experienced anglers say that it's best to avoid it for that period of time. Others disagree completely. I have the sort of the pros and cons listed out here. The people who agree with the statement about not going say it's higher tides, more water volume, so it's more room for the fish to move around, or bait fish come closer to shore, so there's more opportunity for the larger sport fish to feed in the wild. Those who disagree say that fish feed more actively during a full moon, and that lunar transit and opposing lunar transit are much more important than the phase of the moon. And they'll also point to the fact that light from the full moon makes fish more actively feeding at night. So what's the real answer? Well, it's not straightforward, is it? It does depend on species. I found a 9-year study that was done in New South Wales, Australia, where they looked at catch data from 145 offshore fishing tournaments versus the moon phase. So this was 381 fishing days for a total of over 14,000 fish. And this chart shows you full moon phase with the highest catch rates, and it did depend on the species. And you'll see that theme throughout this presentation, that species definitely do have their own specific ways that they react to astronomical events. So songbird migration, near and dear to my heart. These pictures were taken last year in 2020 during the height of the pandemic. So this was the harvest moon. I decided that I was going to combine my work with Explore the Moon, and took the scope out. And here in New Jersey, October is a very heavy bird migration month. So you can actually hear chip notes of birds migrating overhead that night, all throughout the night. You can hear some of the volumes. So I was looking at the full moon for Explore the Moon, and started to notice that some of these birds were flying over the moon. So on the left, you see a photo of a bird passing, I'm calling it over Copernicus crater. And then on the right, I did stack some images, and in a 2-second video was able to extract 2 birds going over the full moon. Anecdotally, it was once thought that birds migrated to and from the moon every year. This was written by Charles Morton in the 17th century. He was a minister and scientist who made that statement. So obviously we know that not to be true now. So the idea of moon watching for migration, I come to find out I didn't invent some newfangled idea. This was described by George Lowry and Robert Newman throughout the 40s to the 60s. And because what they stated was that because nocturnal migrants migrate at heights not easily observable by naked eye, if you point a telescope at the disk of the moon, you can see birds migrating at night. So this idea of whether or not there was a connection between the full moon and migration got me interested, and I started doing some digging. And this was kind of what started me on this path here. I found that there was a study at Lund University in Sweden, and they had the goal of finding out how lunar cycles and moonlight affect birds' departures. What they did was they charted the activity of 39 European nightjars. So if you're familiar with the North American whippoorwill, this is the European cousin of that bird. And the European nightjars migrate from parts of Europe to sub-Saharan Africa in the fall. So the team at Lund University used trackers to measure the acceleration and position throughout the year. And some of what they found was that, well, this is to be expected, that nocturnal hunting activity for flying insects more than doubled on moonlit nights. But what they did discover was the fact that the birds departed for autumn southbound migration consistently took place for this species 10 to 11 days after the full moon. And that the birds were synchronizing their migration and did fly off together around the same time. So I decided to just take a look at some of the information here in North America using some of the tools that are at my disposal. And NextRad is the next generation radar. They're real-time weather maps, but they do pick up concentrations of migrating birds, bats, and insects. And Cornell Lab of Ornithology has commercialized this under the name of Birdcast maps with some funding from government agencies, as well as some corporations and grants. I took a look at this year's full moon during the peak migration time. So that would have been the harvest moon, if you will, around September 21st. This is shortly before midnight, and you can see 731.8 million birds were in flight at that time, versus the new moon of October 6th. Only 185 million birds were in flight. So, this does show some correlation between the amount of illumination and migration. So I decided to go ahead and even further extrapolate that data from September 1st through the new moon of October 6th. And you can see with the cycles of the moon, you can see the full moon of September 20th, 21st, you can see that peak of the 731 million. There was a peak shortly before the new moon of October 6th. This is peak time in New Jersey. I will say that it's not just moon illumination that is most important to migration, but also wind direction plays a very, very big part in this as well. So we had some not so great weather here in New Jersey, and I think along the East Coast and central flyways during that period. So what happens is the birds do get backed up and will then take off. So that peak did occur shortly before the new moon of October 6th this year. All right, looking at species. So this is one of my favorite species, saw-whet owl migrations. So saw-whet owls are really a very secretive species. That's a saw-whet owl on the left-hand side there. It's a very tiny owl. And a lot of what we understand about them comes from banding data. Saw-whet owls typically breed in higher elevations and migrate in winter. I have their range map there on the right. The male birds are more likely to stay on or near their territories, so they establish those territories and won't stray very far from them. And it's the female birds and the male birds who do not have territories are the ones who are more likely to wander. So every 4 years, what happens is there's an eruption year. So whether it's a population boom, these birds will wander in much higher numbers, and these birds do migrate at night. That's me on the left, very excited to make a new friend. So I have been fortunate enough to help out with several banding opportunities throughout the years. One of my friends is a saw-whet owl bander, so he has given me the opportunity many years ago to go out and study these birds in hand personally. So this is near and dear to my heart. There are many studies that look at saw-whet owl, and several that looked specifically at the higher moon illumination and what effect it has on the capture rates of saw-whet owls. So several of these studies did come up that it's a strongly inverse relationship. A few theories that go along with that. The first one being that the owls are just too smart, and the increased moonlight gives them a greater visibility of the mist nets that they're being caught in. That was mentioned by Fry in 2012 study. But also it's thought that owl migration is much lower during the increased moonlight because they're mitigating the risk of being caught by great horned owls and barred owls, which are, basically they're predators. Rodents, which are saw-wet prey, are also not active under brighter conditions. So birds are not going to waste energy if there's no food around. And so with no rodent activity, the birds are not going to go even bother to go try and go hunting. This point about rodents being less active under brighter conditions was studied separately under a barn owl study, where the pellets of barn owls were examined throughout various moon phases. And it was found that around the higher illumination phases, there were fewer rodent remains in the pellets. So a little bit about our local saw-wet owl banding project. As I mentioned, I've been very, very fortunate. That's me on the bottom left, really excited. I think that was me shaking because I was so excited to hold this, this young lady. So our local project is under the leadership of Professor Tom Brown. He is a US federally licensed bird bander. He birds songbirds and raptors specifically. He bands on Sandy Hook, which is part of the Gateway National Park system, and that's located here in Monmouth County, New Jersey. He's been doing this for over a decade. And he is part of a larger effort to collect data about saw-wet owl migration and populations. So there's a whole network of licensed banders throughout the United States, throughout Canada, who are doing this work. And in fact, we do have several stations here in New Jersey. So I was lucky enough to ask him for his data, just to see if this was consistent with what I found in reading some of these studies. And he did give me data from 2010 through 2020. What I found was that the majority of saw-wets were captured under 0 to 20% lunar illumination. If you take a look at the segment of under 40%, you know, that brings us over 50%, which was consistent with the studies that I had read. Now, I do have, I am showing here 20% of saw-wets captured under 81 to 100% lumination. What's not taken into account is the fact that there may have been overcast weather conditions represented in this number, or the height of the moon in the sky when banding was performed. So this is just sort of a quick swag at these numbers. The numbers that you see represent 512 captures over that past decade. These were 99 banding sessions. This year, Tom did the his 100th banding session. It happened to be the full moon, and he only caught 2 saw-wets, so a very low capture rate. And then last night he went out, and I understand that he caught 13 saw-wets, and of course we had no moonlight last night when he was out banding, so there was an early moon set, and we're just coming out of a new moon. Another interesting thing that I found while I was doing my reading, indigo buntings. So speaking specifically about this particular species, there was a 1967 study that tested the role that stars play in this particular species, southbound or autumn migration. The birds were placed in a simulator. So it was a starlit dome that simulated the rotation of the night sky. And what the researchers found was that the birds hopped south, which is typical behavior for a bird when they're about to migrate. They'll hop in the direction in which they want to migrate and then take off. So they did orient themselves appropriately. So then researchers removed constellations within 35 degrees of the North Star, and the birds became disoriented. So this study concluded that it's not individual stars that the birds are migrating to, but rather the orientation around a center point, in this case, the North Star. So this year, of course, thanks to Dave Hoskin, I've become very interested in sunspots. So thank you for that. Thank you for sparking me on that. We've also had several whale strandings here on the Jersey Shore. And I was looking for the causation of the stranding. Of course, you know, there are things like boat strikes and starvation and natural causes. But what I did come across was this study that was done in 2020, was published in the New York Times and throughout various publications about how sunspots are contributing to stranding whales. There was a study done out of Duke University. It studied the correlation of increased sunspots and gray whale in specifically with beach strandings. Findings were published in Current Biology in February of last year, and it found that gray whales strand more often on days when there are increased levels of atmospheric radio frequency noise. So this team from Duke, in conjunction with Lucian Volkovitz of the Adler Planetarium, put together and published this paper. Gray whales were chosen as the study species because they have one of the longest mammal migrations, up to 10,000 miles per year. There is also an extensive history in the stranding database for this particular species, and they do migrate near shore, so that any small navigational errors, you know, could potentially increase the risk of stranding. The findings of that particular study found that whales appeared to be most sensitive to solar radio frequency noise that intensified during solar storms. So they were 4 times more likely to strand when there was a lot of radio frequency noise or from a solar outburst. It created the solar outburst and overwhelmed the whale's senses. So the quote that was in the scientific paper was that it was as if it was turning their GPS off in the middle of the trip, which I found very interesting. This particular team now plans to study other whale species on other continents, and I'm interested to see whether or not there's any correlation between some of the strandings that we have here on the Jersey Shore of humpback whales and the fact that we're in a much more we're, you know, under much more solar activity these days. Staying on the theme of solar activity, the top 2 bullets there talk about how birds could potentially be impacted also by radio frequency noise. There was another study done in 2019. There was a separate study done specific to European robins that found that to be the case. And there are a lot of studies taking place with all these different species. So sharks, there's definitely a correlation that's been found. They're studying things like bacteria, algae, mud snails, lobsters, eels, stingrays, honeybees, mole rats, newts, birds, which we know, tuna and salmon. Dolphins, there is definitely a correlation. Sea turtles, and I did not list seals here, but they're also impacted as well. So there's a lot of work being done in this field. Here's a classic example. So we talk about solar eclipses. I think a lot of people know these examples where birds will quiet down thinking it's nighttime. And these observations go back a really long time. So the Italian monk Ristoro di Arezzo said, this is a quote that I found interesting, from 1239, saying, "All the animals and birds were terrified and the wild beasts could easily be caught." And then Christoph Clavis in 1560 said, "Stars appeared in the sky, and marvelous to behold, the birds fell down from the sky to the ground in terror of such horrid darkness." Of course, a little dramatic, but but we know it to be the case that solar eclipses definitely do impact birds thinking that it's nighttime. Other species as well. Bats become more active. Hippopotami in Africa have been observed exiting the rivers for their nocturnal, sleeping spots. Dairy cows will return to their barns as they would at night. This one's very interesting. So orb weaver spiders, which is your typical garden spider, will remove webs at the end of the day, and they will do so during a solar eclipse as well. And then other examples about crickets chirping, bees returning to their hives. So anything that you can see as a nocturnal behavior will impact some of these species during a total eclipse. I was talking to a friend about this presentation that I was doing, and she asked me if I knew about the dung beetles. So, dung beetles, I mean, hey, why not? Why not check it out? Milky Way and dung beetles, there is a connection. So there was a study done, again, by our friends at Lund University, where they found that African dung beetles were orienting themselves to the starry sky to move along a straight path. What they found was that it's not the stars themselves, but actually the Milky Way. So they did construct an artificial Milky Way using LED lights and found it was the variance in the brightness between the different sections of the Milky Way that the dung beetles were using to migrate. And while this is the first convincing demonstration for the use of starry sky for orientation in insects specifically, but it's actually the first documented use of the Milky Way for orientation in the animal kingdom as a whole. All right, so full moon in humans, everybody knows about the classic lunatic scenario, right? And if you talk to anybody who works in the emergency room, they'll tell you that's true. That information is still being debated, whether or not, people turn into werewolves on the full moon and go crazy. But so there's no real evidence to back that up. But some studies that are credible show that the full moon will cause humans to produce less melatonin and more serotonin. And how this affects the human body, it causes parasites to become more active because the parasites themselves are attracted to increased serotonin. Now, it's no secret that I have Lyme disease and co-infections, and I have noticed a correlation that I've discussed with my doctor, and she's noticed the correlation with her patients as well, that symptoms will increase because the parasites that cause these infections actually do become more active. Staying on the theme of the decrease of melatonin, there's also lower sleep efficiency in human beings. So there was a light controlled study done in 2014 that was published in Sleep Medicine. So, they took out the variable of the fact that, well, maybe it's more light coming in through the window that's keeping somebody awake. But again, they found that it was the decrease in melatonin that was causing sleep issues around full moons. Finally, this one is my absolute favorite. I learned about Australia's Great Barrier Reef, and there's a synchronized coral spawn. It has some crude names, but I've nicknamed it the full moon frolic. The full moon just prior to or a few days just prior to the full moon, when the ocean temperature reaches greater than 26 degrees Celsius and the correct tidal flow occurs. So this is in Australian spring, summer. So we're looking at November, December. Reproductive activity increases. So the corals spawn, and as a result, life on the reef itself just starts to flourish. So we see increases in reproductive activity with clams, sea cucumbers, and starfish as well. So that was a fun one. I had a lot of fun doing the research on this. I just want to say thank you. Thanks for the support that I've gotten in the year and a half that I've been here at RASC. I really do appreciate everybody's guidance. The research that I talked about today is just the tip of the iceberg. Here, you never know, maybe wolves are singing pop songs like Wonderwall under full moons. There's so much to learn. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lisa. That was really intriguing. We know that animals migrate and birds migrate, that sort of thing, but some of the other stuff that you covered was really interesting. Brad noted werewolves appear under the full moon. And Dave says, amazing talk. Does anyone have any questions for Lisa?
Well, just a comment as someone that worked in Emerge, the full moon does affect the activities. And I find that usually the biggest correlation I found when I worked was the fact that whatever come in at the beginning of the full moon phase, that would be consistent throughout the full moon. So a car accident or a heart attack or a drug overdose, that type of whatever sort of preceded just at the beginning of the 3 days of the full moon, guaranteed that would be what you would have 90% of your activity for the period of time.
I could not find empirical data to
Well,
back
I've heard that so many
anecdotally.
yeah, I've heard that
Absolutely.
so many times, but I've worked in the field, and that's one of the things I found. And even on the ships, when I was a field medic on the ships, most of our injuries occurred during that period of time. Most of the picking up casualties from other vessels, because we were the medical ship at the time, it was all correlated to the period of time within the three days of the full moon. So, I mean, there is evidence. It's just a lot of people, oh, you got to have thousands of studies. And that. But the thing is that they take all the emergency departments around the world, they're going to have the facts. But the one thing I really noticed, because I had to set up all the trays for doing all the procedures, that whatever came in at the beginning of that full moon cycle, we just made extras because we were going to need it. So
Interesting.
Yeah, my husband will tell you that I'm moody during the full moon. I don't think I'm moody, but
We won't go there, Lisa. That might be able to be said for many of us, so we just won't go there. But again, thanks so much for this, and thanks for offering it to us. It was really interesting to hear all that. But you hear stories of these animal incidences, but it's really neat to see the science behind it. So thank you.
thank you.
Last but not least on our speaker's presentation this afternoon is Chris Young. And Chris, God love him, has offered to provide a series on alternate months regarding astronomy lore. And this month, he's got the Daughters of Nash and a Little Desert Navigation, as well as the Innu and the Northern Lights. So Chris, welcome, and please take it away.
Thank you, Judy. Got the right screen up, have I?
Not yet.
Not yet. Just a sec here. Screen 2. How about that? Maybe? Share.
Yes, it started to come up. There we are. You're on.
I don't know. You'd think 20 years with the technology, I'd start to get a handle on it. Anyway, good afternoon, everybody. So a couple more stories tonight that I've found interesting. And what happens is, as I tell the story, you get dragged along the path of my research, which hopefully is of some interest to you. So our first story is about the Daughters of Nash. And this story is one that takes place in the Arab world, but it originates pre-Islam. So we're now talking around, before the year sort of 600. And the references I was looking at were mostly referred to the Bedouin. And the Bedouin are desert dwellers, and they stretch from the Atlantic. They're in the deserts from the Atlantic coast all the way through to the Arabian Sea. So here you see a shot from the ISS, and this is the Sinai Peninsula here in the center. Mediterranean's at the top, Red Sea's at the bottom. This is the Gulf of Suez, the Suez Canal. And I'm not sure this shot may have been taken by Chris Hadfield. He had written a caption for it about what we see. So here's a kind of a map of the area, and specifically I was looking at the Sinai Desert and the Negev, where most of the references are. And in the year 600, these areas were fairly well populated. There was, like there is today, a lot of strife through there. And actually, a lot of the Bedouin dwellers were Christian at that time. So this is pre-Islam, before there were some large changes there. And the characters in our story here are stars in the north and stars in the south. And we have the Big Dipper plays a role, as does the Little Dipper and Polaris. So using Sky Safari, this is in the year 600, about 2 or 3 in the morning. And as you can see, there's actually 8 degrees of separation between Polaris and the polar axis, which is interesting to me. And the the Bedouin are an oral culture. They have stories and songs and poetry and proverbs, and not as many things were written down, though they were sometimes recorded by others. But they have in their proverbs and things, they talk about Polaris being having a reliable character, and steadfast, and was always there. Whereas the alternative is Canopus, who's located in the south. Canopus is the second brightest star in the sky, located in the constellation Carina. And Canopus comes up for only a brief period of time, comes up above the horizon and then drops down. It's seasonal. It comes up it starts in the fall, and is usually the Bedouin use a lunar calendar, and you can't really determine the seasons or the starts of things, because a lunar calendar wanders, as we know from our experience talking with Dave and the Mi'kmaq calendar. But so they would use take the stars as being indicators of what season. And when Canopus first shows up is a time period when they're doing some harvest, but the weather's about to change to being cold and being wet. Canopus, being close to the horizon, it's a little murkier down there, and it was seen to be somewhat unreliable, because he no sooner shows up than he disappears again. He's up for a short period of time. The story we have is the legend of Nash and his daughters. So Nash is the poor devil who's wrapped up on top of the bier here. He's being carried by 4 daughters, and 3 daughters lead the procession. The middle daughter is supposed to be carrying her son, which would be, we have Mizar and Alcor together. So so we have the 4 stars of the bowl of the dipper make up the bier, the 4 people carrying the body. Nash has been murdered, and he's believed to have been murdered by Polaris. And they want to have their revenge on Polaris. And there are sort of two advisors that advise, well, no, you shouldn't go after him, because he's actually fairly reliable, but they're unhappy. And there are several variations, and one is that Polaris is the culprit, but Canopus is actually being blamed for it, because he's the less reliable one. There's another says that the daughters are waiting for Canopus to come assist them in dealing with Polaris. So there are several things here. I just have a look. So some different options, and it depends, I guess, in some ways on who you read. But now, something I can't quite understand is why the procession is going clockwise, which is counter to the direction it goes in the sky. And as this illustration, this is from Roland Lafitte. And 2 meetings ago, I talked about the 3 leaps of the gazelle, and I'd used some of his graphics there. Anyway, they're quite correctly have it indicate the counterclockwise direction that things are turning. But I don't know, perhaps that's just an indication of that they're not going to get anywhere being stuck on revenge. Not sure. So I had sort of 3 main references. Roland Lafitte takes a page from this book, which is called Notebooks of a Syrian Camel Driver. It's in French. I translated the page using Google, who has an AI that does a pretty good job up to a point, and I'll come back to that. Also, the Bedouin Star Lore in the Sinai Night Negev by Clinton Bailey, which is good. And he's an Arab scholar, has had books on Arabic poetry and proverbs. I actually looked through the one on proverbs. Most of their proverbs it's a pretty hard life in the desert. And there's also reference to Richard Hinckley Allen, who's about 1898, I think his book came out. And he was the one that suggests that the daughters were waiting for Canopus to come assist them to deal with Polaris. Now, when I translated the page that came from the Syrian camel driver, 1938, it translated the first line, which meant to say that they were traveling northeast with Polaris over the left ear of the camel, and it translated it as they were traveling northeast with a polar fleece over the left eye of the camel. So anyway, that spurred me to go a little further about looking at desert navigation. And so you can imagine if you're sitting on a camel and you're sighting over the left, you've got Polaris above the left ear, so you are, you've got a bearing, and you're going to follow that. In the year 600, Polaris was about 8 degrees away from the polar axis, but nonetheless, I suppose it's in the general right direction. I got reading Hassan Bey. He was an explorer. He's an Egyptian educated at Oxford, and he covered 2,200 miles out in the desert on his own kind of an expedition. And he located, he secretly brought along surveying equipment and located some oases and things out in the desert. But he talked about the quality of his guides. And when he had a good guide, the guide during the day, if he was setting off across the desert, which was very few features, that guide could walk in a straight line for hours at a time. And Hassan Bey would bring out his compass and check on him, and he just said, it's kind of as straight as an arrow. At night, the guide would if they wanted to go, I think it was southwest, southeast, I think it was. So the guide would see where Polaris was, put Polaris behind his left ear, and he would sight on a star ahead in the direction he wanted to go. And then he would head towards that for about 5 minutes, and then he would stop, check Polaris, and then turn around and then sight on, either continue on the same star or adjust to another star which had moved in the correct direction. So there was a lot of care there. And the Bedouin, like people everywhere, they make use of all of the clues in their environment, right? Be it landmarks, the weather, the direction of the dunes, the color of the soil, how gritty it is, and the Bedouin are often forced to travel at night during very hot periods of, during the day. You just cannot physically travel at that time. And so at night they like to travel when they've got good moonlight, because then they can see what they're walking on, and it's safer for the men and the camels in terms of walking on sharp stones and things. So it may be that brighter stars perhaps were sort of more important to them. There seems to be a lot of information lost, again, because it was an oral traditions, and some of those things have now been lost, because now they have GPS, or in this case, this person has no problem because they just follow the tire tracks. So anyway, it was intriguing. May come back to that another day. The other story information I wanted to talk about comes out of, or at least I got interested from The Arctic Sky, a book on the Inuit astronomy and star lore by John MacDonald. It's quite good and fairly scholarly work. He has a lot of references to explorers and interviews with Inuit. And I was interested in the aurora borealis. So the Vikings had coined the term the Northern Lights. That's I guess has been written down in their scripture. Aurora borealis was a term that Galileo came up with. Aurora being the Roman goddess of the dawn, and Boreas being the Greek god of the north wind. And of course, you're all familiar with generally what the Canadian Arctic looks like. We have a benefit in looking at the aurora, because the aurora relates to the magnetic North Pole, not the polar axis, and the magnetic North Pole is more towards Canada, if you will. So we get preferred viewing of the the aurora. We now get interesting vantage points. This is taken from the International Space Station. I was tempted to try and link up to some of the YouTube videos, but one knows one's own weaknesses sometimes, and so I've just stayed with the stills here. The story is that when the Inuit look up at the northern lights and they're moving around, they see that those are their ancestors. These are the people that have passed away. They are up there, they are dancing, and they love to play soccer. So they're kicking the soccer ball all around the sky. This is considered this is a positive place for them to be. And the reference to the soccer ball that they use is a walrus skull, which got my. Here we have with Eskimo. It's funny how that term now seems way out of place with a regular soccer ball around the year 1900. But as you know what a walrus looks like, doesn't look that great for a soccer ball, and the skull, it's a pretty hard looking thing. But apparently when they kick the ball, they like the tusks to dig in when they do that. And I did finally find, I guess this is a contemporary story now, because I found a picture here of a sculpture that was done for York University. We have the two Innu carvers who did this large statue, which I think is something in the order of like 26 tons. And they have inlaid some silver in for his eyes. And then this is the ball here over in the top right. And there's a kind of a detail. In this case, it's been cast in bronze, and it has silver on the tusks. So it bears out the description that we find in MacDonald's book. I also found day before yesterday a children's book about the Northern Lights, and it's about a delightful book, wonderful illustrations, and it's about a young girl who's lost her mother and is kind of in mourning, and her grandmother then tells her the story of the Northern Lights. And I'll read one paragraph because it has kind of I think the right feel for how the story goes. So to quote, "But unlike us, they are immortal now, and nothing hurts them anymore. So they use a huge frozen walrus head with big tusks for a soccer ball. When they give that walrus head a mighty kick, it flies across the sky, and they all chase it from one corner of the sky to the other. If you whistle, they will come closer, and if you keep whistling, they will come even closer. But beware, they may come too near. If they do, that walrus head might come swooping down and knock your head off. When they come too close, rub your fingernails together so they make a clicking sound that will make them go away." So that's anyway. It's a delightful book, and it notes the idea that you can bring the Northern Lights down close to you by whistling, and this is sort of reported from the Innu in MacDonald's book, and that the fact that the Northern Lights, that the aurora would come down closer to the Earth there's some debate, but many Arctic explorers, and these are reputable people, and in some cases where there's been several together, and they have seen the aurora come down close to the Earth such that it would obscure something. They'd be looking through the aurora at an object beyond, so they it was certainly close. So the one sort of scientific illustration we have here over on the left-hand side shows essentially the band of the aurora, and on sort of the naysayers or the doubters of that the aurora comes close, and that there are also sounds associated with it, which the Innu say there is. They say it kind of makes a kind of a swishing sound, kind of like when they have their sleds, the runners on their sleds going across the snow. It's kind of the sound that it makes. anyway, points out that the aurora are often about 80 kilometers up in the sky, and the air is so thin up there that it couldn't carry any physical sound. However, if the aurora does come closer to the Earth, then perhaps there is something. Certainly, there's electromagnetic activity. We're all clear on that, and Lisa Ann Fanning's discussions here a few minutes ago make us even more aware of it. Anyway, but that's of interest. So the jury's out. I think there has been some studies in Finland at the university there where they've put out microphones at night, and they've thought that they have had some sounds that have come down closer to the Earth. So, and then a last image, which is we all are aware that we have the aurora borealis, which is our aurora of the north, and then there's also the aurora australis. And so this is the aurora looking at from New Zealand. So just as an example of that, indeed it does happen in the deep south. So anyway, so that's it for me, Judy.
Thanks so much, Chris. That was intriguing, especially learning how the folks in the desert navigate. It's like you stated, with this grand expanse of desert with no real landmark, makes you wonder how, in fact, they do navigate. But it's interesting how they do it during the day and the night. I mean,
in the kind of more northern areas of the Sinai and the Negev, it's flatter, I guess, towards the south, and the getting close to the Red Sea, there are mountainous areas, and there the guides say, well, no, we don't pay attention to the stars because we have all these landmarks to follow. And the comment was made that because there are actually a number of websites that study kind of navigation, how people navigate around the world. And they talked about the fact that when they were traveling and they were unable to see, I think because there was some fog and mist and things, they knew the territory quite well, so they'd go by the feel of their feet, as in terms of like, what was the slope of the ground? Was it a sand? Had the texture changed? Like, so they would pay attention to these things such that when there were days when they couldn't see, they could use their other senses to keep them on track. Anyway, it's all very interesting and but delightful children book called Northern Lights, The Soccer Trails, and the Halifax Library has a copy.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. If you could stop sharing, if you would,
I
please.
will see what I can do about that. There we go.
Thank you so much, sir. And I will go back to sharing my screen. Yeah. Here we go. So if it will go forward, there we go. We have our 3 special presentations, and now we have Paul Heath. Paul Heath is our resident poet and also our observing chair. And every month he provides a new poem for us. So Paul, I know your poem is up and available to you. It's called Eyes Uplifted.
Hey, just before that, I just want to just put it out there. I do have this month's Sky News 50 copies. So if anybody needs any for events they're doing, just let me know. Hey. Eyes uplifted. The silhouette upon the hilltop sat, rising towards the sky. Ow, ow, yo, lifted, echoing to the moon's full light. Elders by the glowing embers sit, arms rising to the sky. Hunters there, the chase continued. A silhouette of glittering stars takes form. Waves gleam and glittering and swirl, tossed upon the sandy shore by full moon's light. Yet as the wave retreats, the sand still swirls and glitters and gleams, silvered forms entwined, new life within the wet sands conceal. Eons and ages pass. Each night by fires blaze and embers glow, we sat by the sparkling roof above and snared. With tales of hunts and heroes and monsters fair, we join the glittering motes to tales, until so entwined became the stars held safe our souls. As you know, I try to make a poem related to the topics of the day. Unfortunately, Dave, I couldn't fit the robotic telescope in.
Maybe that was the silhouette upon the hilltop.
Yeah. Well, the first one was the wolf sitting
Yes,
up on
yes.
the hilltop. So.
Hey, well, thanks so much for that. Any questions for Paul before we move on? Okay. Well, next up is Dave Chapman, our observation chair. I always get those two words mixed up, observing and outreach. And actually, Paul is the outreach chair. David is the observing chair. And to that end, I know Dave has an exciting presentation for us on the November skies. So Dave, I will stop sharing and it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Judy.
Whoops, and I will make you co-host just a moment again. I guess you've gone offline for a moment.
Oh, right. Yeah, sorry about that. I got cut off. So when I came back in, yeah, right.
You're co-host again, sir.
Okay. All right, are we in business?
We are.
All right, well, thank you very much. Lots to talk about this month. Lots going on. Lots up. Right, so let's just move right along. So I always start with the sun, and as always, this presentation is available as a PDF on the Halifax Centre web page, and all of the underlined links in this presentation are active on that document. So if there's anything you want to look into further, go there and have a look. So the sun has been fairly active this recent week or so, and I guess we got some pretty nice aurora the other night. People out west saw an amazing aurora. Even people in Nova Scotia saw it, and I think we saw a few pictures. So the sun continues to get more active, and hopefully there'll be more aurora in months and years to come. So the main thing to say about the sun in November is that we have standard time is going to be resumed tomorrow. So tonight, be prepared for that tonight or tomorrow to change your clocks. And the main effect of that is that we're going to get a much earlier, it's going to get dark much earlier at night. And for a little while, it'll be lighter in the morning. This is something I always look forward to, so you can get out there and get observing earlier. There isn't much change over the month other than that. Things are slowing down, and in December, of course, we'll get to the solstice where things aren't changing hardly at all. But there really isn't that much change in the hours of darkness and sunlight. Maybe an hour more darkness over the month and an hour less sunlight. But the main thing would just be that, tomorrow it'll when you get up tomorrow, I guess what we're doing, we're falling back, so it'll be a lot lighter in the morning and a lot darker at night.
David?
Yes?
Just as a matter of note, we do have members in Saskatchewan, so their time does not change.
Okay, noted. Do we have more than one member in Saskatchewan?
Not at this point, I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard to keep in mind, we have this wide-flung membership now. Sorry about that, James. So let's head on to the moon. There's a lot going on with the moon, and some of it's already happened because it's already the 6th of November. But we had the moon and Mercury in the morning. I missed that. It was cloudy. New moon occurred on the 4th, and it's the Gepta-Gewigus rivers freezing over time to the Mi'kmaq. And again, if you go to that page online, that link will take you to a pronunciation guide for that. And the moon was at perigee yesterday, so that means we'll be experiencing large tides today and the next couple of days. When the moon is closest to the Earth, the tidal forces are at their maximum, and especially when that coincides with a new or full moon, you kind of get those two effects working together. So coming up, November 8th, I guess, is that Monday? Monday evening, if it's clear, see if you can have a look for Venus and the crescent moon. That should be very nice. They're about 5 degrees apart in the evening sky. A nice photo op if you like those kinds of photographs. As the moon gets older, it'll pass by Saturn and Jupiter in the southwest evening sky. No really close approaches, but it's a nice little parade that goes on. So if you like planetary and lunar observing, 10th to the 11th is a nice period of time. Actually, November 11th is the first quarter moon, and it's a very good time to observe the lunar X. I would get out as soon as the sun goes down. I would set up your telescope and have a look, because it might be underway. It might not be an X, but if you like to see it develop over time, I would start looking as soon as the sun goes down, and try to watch it through the evening. On the moon carries on to go past Neptune and Uranus, and again, as I've said in the past, you have opportunities to use the moon to find those planets in your binoculars. So we've got a full moon on the the night of the 18th into the 19th, and there's a eclipse of the moon, and I'll say a bit more about that. It's technically a partial eclipse, but it's 97%, so it's going to have a pretty significant shadow on it. It's not 100%. The only downside is that it's peaks at 5 a.m. Atlantic Standard Time. I don't know what that does for our member in Saskatchewan. I guess it's earlier in the morning, so he'll be able to see that without any problem. But for us, it means getting up a bit early. And on the 27th, last quarter. And as far as observing the moon is concerned, I've just mentioned lunar X on the 11th of November. It happens to be first quarter. And so there's a few things while you're watching that eclipse. You might want to pick out a few things in the Explore the Universe program. There's a few things you can see in binoculars, and I've outlined them there. And I always promote the first quarter moon as a good time to observe. Obviously, you can observe the moon anytime you can see it, but at first quarter moon, it's conveniently placed at sunset in the early evening. It's high up in the sky in the south, and a good time, to be observing. So, and you can see quite a few features over 2 or 3 days. So if you're just getting started, that's a good time to start. If you're a keener, you can basically observe the moon anytime it's in the sky. Here's the eclipse details. I leave out the penumbral parts. The penumbral part of the eclipse is pretty boring. But you can see if you could try seeing if you could notice that. So the partial eclipse here in Atlantic time Starts at 3:19. It's a maximum just after 5, and it ends at 6. The partial eclipse ends at 6:48, and then just before moonset at 7:26. So you need to have a clear view to the west, I would say, in order to see that eclipse. So if you don't have that at home, you might find a place to go and dress warmly and find a coffee shop that's open that time of night and get a hot chocolate. Hot chocolate's better than coffee for keeping warm. Anyway, it's been a while since we had a good eclipse of the moon. So, and don't forget that it's in the morning of the 19th. Don't go out at night on the 19th. A lot of people will go out on the 19th looking for an eclipse. And I keep on telling people it's in the morning. Lots going on with the planets. Mercury is low in the eastern sky at the start of November. And well, I guess we missed it. I don't know if anyone saw it pair with the waning crescent moon, but as I said, it was cloudy here, so I didn't even try. And Venus is sort of medium low and quite brilliant in the western evening sky. And the moon will be near Venus on the 8th, Monday. Mars is too close to the sun really to observe, and it's quite small as well. It must have just passed a superior conjunction, so it's kind of on the other side of the sun, not very bright, not very big. It does have a rendezvous with Mercury on the 10th in the dawn sky, but that would be very difficult to see. I think you'd need a telescope, and again, you'd have to be a keener and get up early. Again, Jupiter and Saturn are in the southwestern evening sky. You could basically go out as soon as it gets dark to look at Jupiter and Saturn. I was watching Jupiter last night and a couple nights ago. There's some interesting phenomena taking place with the moons, shadow transit and things like that. Great red spot. Uranus is in opposition in Aries. Some people say they can see it with their naked eye in a dark sky, but very few of us live in a dark sky. So on the 17th would be a good time to look for it, using the moon as a guide. And the same with Neptune. It's considerably dimmer, but with binoculars you might be able to pick out Neptune. Actually, that date is wrong. I don't know what happened there. I think it's maybe the 13th, the 13th of November. That's wrong. There are some meteor showers. However, the Taurids aren't bad. I guess we're sort of in the midst of the Taurids now, and the South Taurids and the North Taurids. They're a pretty minor meteor shower, but they are active at the moment. The Leonids are active on the 17th of November, but it's 2 days before the full moon. Nevertheless, you might see some of the brighter meteors on that night. Keep your eyes peeled. And so here's some, basically I said all this with words, but here are some pictures of the configurations of the moon and a few planets. So there's Venus and moon on Monday night. Wednesday in the morning twilight, that difficult conjunction between Mercury and Mars. And here are the two, I got the date right on this picture, the 13th of November for Neptune, and Wednesday the 17th November. If you're looking for Neptune and Uranus, that's how to find them with the moon. And here's one. This is not in the online version of this talk. I just put this in this morning. It came to my attention that Comet Leonard is on its way. I took this picture last night while I slept, using the robotic telescope at BGO. Dave mentioned I was a frequent user. I didn't think I was the most frequent user, but I guess I could go and check that. But I have been doing it. I think I might have been the second user after him testing it. I seem to remember that happening during a General Assembly a few, 5 or 6 years ago. Anyhow, last night I took this picture, it's easy peasy to take a picture of anything. I mean, like, I think the command line for this was #request object equals whatever is C2021A1. That's it. That's all you'd have to do. And you'll get a picture. Now, I also put in repeat equals yes, because I want to see repeated pictures. Anyway, I was quite delighted this morning to see that Comet Leonard is brightening up quite a bit and will continue to get brighter. By the way, in the picture there, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, there's a couple of little galaxies there that I hadn't expected to see. They're around 15th magnitude, and this is about, what's that, 240 seconds. What's that, 4 minutes? Yeah, 4-minute exposure. So you can actually see a little bit of motion of the comet in that period of time. So this comet is heading towards us, and it is going to reach perihelion on the January the 3rd at a distance of 0.61, so about 60% out from the sun compared to the Earth. It's in a parabolic orbit, as much as they can tell, so it comes from way out there. Its inclination is 132 degrees, which means it's kind of going around, if you like, the wrong way compared to the planets. Its distance is currently 1.4 astronomical units, and it will, over the next several weeks, pass from Ursa Major, oh, I spelt that wrong too, Boötes into Serpens and Hercules. The closest approach is kind of in the period of time 11th to the 13th of December, when it's only a quarter of an astronomical unit away. And who knows about comet magnitudes? People are saying it might be 4.5. You never know with comets. But it should be visible in binoculars. I'm going to say it helps if you're in a dark sky. After that, it swings around the sun. It's going to be awfully hard to see. Oh, by the way, did I mention it's in the morning? You have to see it in the morning. Basically at dawn, so 6 o'clock in the morning is when you have to be looking for that. So I'd like to tell the public about it, but not very many people are interested in going comet hunting at 6 a.m. I've noticed that before. If it's in the evening, they might go look. If it's in the morning, forget it. Getting ready for work or school or something. So anyway, that's not too early, especially if you're retired. Here's a little bit of a chart. The comet path is kind of in the middle there. It's a bit subdued, but you can see the little crosses. And it's basically up there in Ursa Major, almost in coma. And then it travels through Boötes into Serpens and Hercules. So that's where to look for it. And, you should be able to, maybe if you have a telescope, by all means, try for it. It looks like it goes by globular cluster Messier 3 on the 3rd of December. Is that what that's saying? Anyway, if you have something like Sky Safari, maybe Stellarium, it would give you an up-to-date position. I've got it in Sky Safari. I found this chart, so I didn't bother making one. Now, as far as the other things to look at in the sky, this is the last month I'll be talking about the autumn targets in Explore the Universe. Explore the Universe, for those that don't know, is the entry-level observing program that the RASC offers for anyone. You don't have to be a member to get a certificate of completion. So the constellations here are Pegasus, Andromeda, Cassiopeia, Perseus, and Aries. None of these constellations have really bright stars, although in a dark sky they show up fairly well. So here's the stars in Explore the Universe, and you can see the brightest one is Mirfac, which is the 35th brightest star in the sky of all the stars. The stars with N after their names are used for celestial navigation, so kind of worth noting those ones. And all of the ones named here are good for a SynScan telescope sky alignment. I'm not really sure. I'm not up on the Celestron ones, but probably most of them are used for sky aligning. So it's worthwhile learning the names of stars for that reason alone, because a lot of these telescopes say point your telescope at Alpheratz, and then you hear people go, "Where the heck is Alpheratz?" Well, it's worth learning some of the brighter star names for that reason alone. The Explorer of the Universe is a bit skimpy on deep sky objects. The Andromeda Galaxy is kind of the low-lying fruit. I mean, you can pick that out in the sky with your naked eye if it's dark enough. From my backyard in Dartmouth, it's a pretty pitiful sight, I would say, the galaxy, because of the light pollution. The double cluster and the stars around Mirfac and Perseus, there's a couple of clusters there that work a little. They come off a little better in binoculars in the city. I think they're worth looking at. In terms of double stars, Cygnus is still quite high up in the sky at this time of year, believe it or not, when it gets dark. And so 16 Cygni is considered a fall and autumn double star. Right? So easy to, because almost above. And Delta Cepheus, of course, is another double star, which is also a very important variable star. And I guess the challenge is to have a look at that. And then there's a neat double star, Theta Tauri, in the Hyades, in the head of the bull. I was just going to say, you may have heard about my asteroid. Most of you have heard about it by this time. Anyway, nobody's mentioned it so far. I think it happened a few weeks ago, so it's old news. But I wanted you to know that after a lot of trouble, going to a lot of trouble, I got a picture of it, and here it is. People were asking me, "Can we get a picture of the asteroid?" I said, "It's tough, but I'll try." And here it is. There's my picture of the asteroid. It's by me. No robotic telescopes were used in taking this picture. Anyway, I'll just quickly remind you that I did not discover this asteroid. It was discovered in Chile in 1986 by a Belgian astronomer who's good at those kinds of things. The orbit is 2 1/3 times wider than Earth's. In between, it's a main belt asteroid between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. Very well behaved. Nearly circular. As I pointed out, I've looked at the eccentricity of all the other Nova Scotian asteroids, and I think I am the least eccentric of David Lane, Dave Turner, Roy Bishop, Whitehorn, Majas. So I just wanted to point that out, that even though you think I'm kind of nuts, I am actually the least eccentric. So, and it orbits the sun every 3.5 years, roughly. And it's about 5 kilometers across, which means it would comfortably fit in Bedford Basin. Although I rest assured it will never end up there. But if it did, or an asteroid that size came to Bedford Basin, it would kind of ruin your day. As far as its color is concerned, it has an albedo number. And as far as I can make out, it's the color of aged asphalt. Not fresh asphalt, but aged asphalt. And it's one of 13 asteroids with Nova Scotia connections.
So Dave, there are a couple of comments. One from Bob Russell said, looks amazingly like the exoplanet Russet. And Pat Kelly says, one of the rare starchy asteroids.
Yes, it's a starchy asteroid. Yes.
And James asked, does his asteroid, James Egger, count as a Nova Scotia connection? Well, of course it does. You're a member.
Gosh, I guess there's 14 now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I guess we could do that.
Yeah.
Extend the hand of friendship. I guess we'll have to look around and see what others. I keep on discovering new ones. Like I didn't know about Cabot after John Cabot, the explorer, and so I keep on discovering new ones. Anyhow, that's the end of my presentation. So if you have any questions, just shoot at this point.
Okay, thank you, David. Any
Okay.
questions for David before we move on?
Okay. Thank you all.
Okay, second here. I've lost it. Oh, help. There we are. Okay. I'm going to share my screen so we can go on to the news from the board, which is this one. And sorry about that. We're just going to go quickly through this. And here we go. So again, welcome to the meeting on November 6th. First thing up is our AGM coming up on December the 4th. Mid-month, roughly 11 days or 7 days from now, all members will be notified through the announced list of who the slate of nominees are for the elected and soon to be, well, January appointed nominees for the various positions within our board. On the 30th, members will be forwarded the agenda, the compilation of all the annual reports from those that are required, as well as members can currently access the draft AGM minutes that are on our website under board minutes. And they'll also be sent a link on November 30th to that effect. On the 4th, our AGM is from 1 p.m. to approximately 1:45. We're attempting to keep it brief. Reports will not be read. That's why they are being pre-circulated. Questions will be entertained during that point in time, though. And then the members' meeting follows that. And our guest speaker for the members' meeting is Dr. Phil Groff, who's the executive director of our organization. So we're looking forward to hearing from Phil. The members' survey. We had posted one in June. It was a 9-question multiple choice questionnaire. We received 15 responses. Once this meeting is concluded, I have another email posted or ready to go to the announced list, and it will be reposted as of today. And members who haven't responded, you have an opportunity to do so. Those of you that did, many, many thanks. The 15 that were received have already been collated by Pat Kelly. We're waiting to hear from other members who have not had that opportunity yet to respond to us. So please do. We can only act on what you tell us. And if you don't tell us, we can't do much about, we can't read your mind. So please do respond to the survey when you get it. It's a SurveyMonkey response, so it's easy. I want to bring to your attention the last edition of Nova Notes. And again, I'll repeat that the incredible photograph on the front is from one of our members, Jason Dane. It's called, it's Moon over Bayswater or something to that, or Milky Way over Bayswater, sorry. So it's an incredible photo. There are lots of articles from local members, as well as notes from the September and October meeting. If you have something you'd like to submit to the November, December edition, please get them to John and Lisa by midnight, December 18th. That way they can get it put together before the end of December. And to get to them, just have to email novanoteseditor@halifax.rasc.ca. As always, our board reevaluates the SCO use guidelines as the health restrictions change. And so we have phase 5 here in this province. And the board determined that during phase 5, proof of vaccination for members and their guests is a must. So that if you bring a member to, if a member decides to bring a guest to SCO, then you are responsible to ensure that the vaccination status is up to date. Will we have a scanner there? No, we will not. We are recognizing that our members have integrity and they will take care of this in good fashion. So just, you know, I'll speak for myself. I carry my vaccination record with me. So if anyone asks you for it, be prepared. Halifax Center Stars in our calendar, brand new calendar for 2022, thanks to Paul Gray as editor this past year, or for the upcoming year. Michael Gatto, I'm sure you've seen that picture before where he sketched the Mars during, well, 15 different sessions there. And of course, Fiona with her incredible photo of the rails to the sky, just an amazing photograph, how she lined that up and took that photograph. So congratulations to our 2 members. And remember, you too can own one of these wonderful calendars. But also in JRASC, our journal, there were 3 of our members who have contributed there. And this is not a photo from David's article on the Gegenschein Mars and the Mystery Solved. This is actually a photo of when my husband and I and Dave and his wife were in Ketchum-Kujik National Park, a National Historic Site, and Dave pointed out this brightness in the sky and realized it was the Gegenschein. So we had an opportunity to view it as it traversed the sky for a while. Read his article. If you don't know what the Gegenschein is, read his article. It's very interesting. Blair McDonald also had a 2-page article regarding removing background banding. And of course, Michael Gatto on the inside back cover had his sketch of the Alpine Valley. The 2022 calendars, if you'd like a copy, they're $25 each. You can e-transfer it to our treasurer at halifax.rasc.ca, but be sure to confirm you want the calendar and include your name and address in the notes field so that they know exactly who to send it to and where to send it, because sometimes email addresses do not really provide a person's name. If you wish to mail it, it's there as well, the address, and it's on our website too, folks, so don't worry about that. Also, our fundraising committee, chaired by Blair McDonald, have again agreed that we would have the Halifax Center Astroimagers donating incredible photos. For now, we have 4 folk, Blair, Jason Dane, Jerry Black, and David Hoskin, who have volunteered their photos for purchase. If you want to see them, all you have to do is go onto our website under quick info, as you see in that little box on the right. That would be the title on the column, and immediately underneath it is the SCO Astrophoto fundraiser. So the fundraising from this does go towards further advancements out at SCO, improvements out at SCO. So if you'd like to donate one of yours, please let me know, and we'll certainly add you to the list of photos that members can purchase. And certainly any member near and far can purchase one of these images in an 8x10 print. And it's certainly a great idea coming, the holiday season coming up, it might be a great idea for someone that you know. And again, it's $30 again this year. It includes the shipping and taxes. Again, it's the treasurer at halifax.rasc.ca, or you can mail in. But if you do email, please be sure to state the name of the astro image you want, because there are more than one, as you can appreciate. And again, with your name and address in the notes field. And the same idea when you mail it in too, please let us know that this is what you'd like to purchase. RASC Awards, just a reminder, this was shown in the RASC Bulletin back in September, but if you would like to nominate anyone from our center or further afield for that matter, to any one of our national RASC Awards, Chant Medal, Ken Chilton, etc., the deadline for submission is December 31st, and you can send your nominations to Chris Gaynor at cgaynor@shaw.ca. And if you've forgotten where to send it, all you have to do is go onto the rasc.ca website and look for RASC Awards, and you'll be able to find the descriptors for these as well as how to nominate. Also, the last edition for this fall on the Insider's Guide to the Galaxy with Chris Vaughn is this coming Tuesday on the 9th. And Chris will be addressing lunar geology. So if you ever wondered why the moon looks like it does, Chris will be describing that particular aspect of lunar observing. Just have to go onto the RASC site and you can register, and it's also live streamed to the RASC YouTube site. Our upcoming meeting dates here for the center. As I mentioned a moment ago, December 4th is our members meeting with Dr. Phil Groff being our speaker, along with the AGM that precedes it. But also, we've already got some speakers lined up for the new year, and to us, it's really exciting. We have Blair McDonald, one of our own members, addressing the pandemic astroimaging, and Chris again is addressing another issue of astronomy lore. In February, we have Keegan Oiko, one of our youth members, who's also happens to be a member of the youth committee. He's going to be describing youth committee and some special projects that he's involved in and the committee has worked in. We also have Dr. Jennifer West confirmed from the University of Toronto, and she's going to be addressing magnetic tunnel project that she's involved in. And Dave, you didn't know this, but you're up for February as well with your amusing astronomy stories that you had suggested you would be willing to do for us.
Well, that's not exactly what I'll be talking about, but we can fix that.
Yes, I just put that in there as a placeholder for now.
Just so people don't get the wrong idea.
Okay.
What I'm doing is I'm going to do a series on how things get their names in the sky.
Okay.
Right? And I'm not doing it all at once because I think it would be boring. So I'm going to start, and I got this idea because I started looking into how asteroids get their names, right? Because I was kind of curious as how one of them got my name. And in the process of doing that, I discovered some very interesting. So the first one's going to be about how asteroids get their name, and there are some I would say whimsical asteroids out there. So the amusing story part is kind of the smaller part of what I'll be talking about. It's mostly about how things get their names.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
And Chris and Dave will be alternating from month to month for as long as they're willing to do so, and as long as their stories are there to be told. In March, we have Dave Shubin, who will be addressing NASA missions, current and upcoming. And Randy Atwood has agreed, but we haven't got a date yet fixed for him to address the 2024 total eclipse. And of course, we have a few other speakers as well that we've been in touch with, and we'll let you know as soon as we get them confirmed as well. So 2022 is shaping up to be quite an exciting year for us as well as far as our meetings go. So I mentioned at the very beginning of this meeting about how, what the perks were, and I said I would tell you how to join. I realize most of you, if not all of you at this point, have joined, but for those who are listening to this recording in the future who are not members, it's quite easy to become a member. What you would do is you would go into the About Us on our Halifax RASC website, and you would look for becoming a member. If you click on the word join, it allows you to join online, and that will connect you to the RASC website in which you fill out your form, send in your payment, etc., and go that route. If you're old school and prefer hard copy with a check, you can click on the form, fill it out, and send it in to the RASC office, and they will certainly take care of you. It is recognized that with COVID, some of our members and prospective members have financial difficulties, and the cost of becoming a member might be a challenge. If assistance is required, they can email mempub@rasc.ca, explain the situation and request assistance, and they will answer your request. And I mentioned about the Halifax Center and the perks. We do have our own email discussion list that you can join. And keep in mind, it is optional, it is not required. And that's true for the National RASC discussion list as well. These are options that you can choose to join. And also there are links to our St. Croix Observatory and how you can access it and everything you ever needed to know about SCO, but we're afraid to ask. So at this point, I'll stop sharing and entertain any questions.
I don't have a question, but I could say something.
Sure.
Look what I've got. And I want to congratulate Paul Gray for his image on the front cover. It's a wonderful image. Thank you, Paul Gray. Second thing is that the Society office is moving. I don't know if anybody's aware of that or not, but we're moving back to College Avenue in Toronto, right up close to the university, back to our roots. That'll happen, I believe, in January when the actual physical move takes place. The old building that we're in right now is being demolished. There's going to be a 5-story underground parking facility and about a 17-story above ground. So much different than what's 3 stories there now.
Yeah, apparently the new location is only about something like It's less than a kilometer away from where the original RASC offices were.
Yeah.
But it's so close to the university. They're having the telescope museum as well in the new offices. So that'll be exciting as
Right
well.
on.
Thanks for the reminder, James. Brad asked, is there any word on when we can go back to meetings at St. Mary's? Not at this point. We're not anticipating actually going back to St. Mary's probably until the spring. And we will be keeping in touch with them to find out when it would be okay to do so.
Have you been told specifically anything, Judy?
I've been waiting to hear back from them as to when, and I was relying on them to contact us.
Yeah, I probably, knowing the way administrations work, I wouldn't assume
Okay.
that will ever happen. I mean, what we've been told now with respect to, for example, our observatory tours is provided we check the vaccination status at the door, that's, you know, it's essentially it, other than being masked, I guess. And they don't even for classes, you don't, if you can separate by 1 meter, 1 meter is the distance, you don't have to even mask for that matter. So might be interesting to actually somehow survey the membership to see if you did restart in January or February, would people want to come if it were possible? Just a thought.
I can tell you that the Nova Scotia Museum has started opening up its auditorium for public events, and I sort of was involved in the complete and utter chaos of their first meeting back there, only in the sense that they were using my Zoom account. I got one for the Blonde and Action Society, and about half the people, there were about 20-something people watching it on Zoom, and about 20-something people showed up at the library or showed up at the museum, so it was about half and half. And the big problem that they ran into there was they had 2 laptops, neither of which would actually work both with Zoom and or their data projector. So the people that actually didn't go to the museum had no trouble watching the Zoom presentation. I think everybody else had to more or less gather around the small laptop that they had there, or were watching it on Zoom on their smartphones while sitting in the audience because they couldn't get the data projector working.
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly something we, at the board level, we've discussed, is that when we do get back to in-person meetings, that we are going to have to be, we're going to have capability not only for those folks in the room, but also for those people that wish to attend by Zoom. And I know that there have been a couple of volunteers in a previous Astro chat. Trust me, I've kept your names, so you will be contacted with respect to how it can be done. And Dave, perhaps you, Dave Lane, Dave the 8th, perhaps you can suggest at some point what technical requirements there would be for us to be able to use Zoom as well as in-house live. So that's one of the things that we were concerned about, was how we could do both. Because there are members such as James and Lisa Ann, for instance, who would not be traveling here for our meetings. And a couple of others too, down and through the US, that are members with us and would not be traveling. So let alone people within our own province who don't like to travel, especially during the winter months. So we would have to offer that Zoom offering again to those souls so that they can benefit from what we're presenting over January, February, March, etc. And we have had people attending the Zoom sessions that never attended live. So, I mean, there is something to be said for Zoom sessions.
I am in touch with the manager at SMU that sort of is managing the COVID protocols. Because I had to, as I said, I had to speak to him about what was necessary for our public and group tours. And I mean, if you want, I mean, I can at least ask, see if it's possible. And he's obviously he would be the one who would probably be providing the advice to the people who book the rooms, for example.
Right.
So, I mean, if they aren't open for outside, what would be called an outside group, then it's a simple, there's no point in investigating further. But if they are open to it under the similar protocols that we have in place that I have to do for my group tours, which isn't onerous, it's simply doing the same as any other, as a restaurant would do, checking vaccination at the door. At least you'd know whether you could go ahead if you wanted to.
Yeah. But we're certainly going to look into that.
Yeah.
And I know we have been discussing it. It's been an ongoing discussion for the last several months. Because it's something that we do want to get to, and assuming that there aren't any more variants that'll throw a wrench into things, it's possible. Any other questions? Okay. With that in mind, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to our speakers, Dave Lane, Lisanne Fanning, and Chris Young for your presentations. Many, many thanks. And to our usuals, Paul Heath and Dave Chapman, many thanks. And we'll see you folks at our next meeting, which is the AGM on December 6th. So take care all.